Cali didn't dare move. She was breathing shallowly, eyes scrunched up tight, listening, waiting. Yes, there it was again. Only a slight sound, but unmistakable. The sound of cautious, measured footsteps of someone searching. Trying to be as quiet as possible, Cali tried to push herself backward, but she was already hard up against the cold metal wall behind her. She tried to make herself as small as possible in the hopes that she could remain hidden and the person or creature searching would not find her. She opened her eyes just a crack, and as she did, she saw the shadow of the seeker come closer to where she hid. The shadow loomed larger, distorted by the flickering light from the overhead bulbs that sputtered, casting a sickly yellow glow across the room. The smell of rust and damp filled Cali's nostrils, making her want to gag, but she kept still, her breath coming in rapid, shallow gasps. Her heart pounded so loudly in her chest that she was sure the seeker could hear it. The footsteps halted. The shadow stood still. Cali squeezed her eyes shut again, biting her lip to keep from making any noise. She could feel the presence of the seeker, something dark, menacing, an aura that seemed to suck the warmth out of the air. It was close, too close. She had no idea how long she could keep this up. Her muscles were aching from tension, every nerve in her body screaming at her to run, to escape. But she knew that any sudden movement would give her away. She didn't even know what she was hiding from. All she knew was that she had woken up in this cold, grimy room with no memory of how she had gotten there, and now someone, was looking for her. The footsteps resumed, this time circling around, as if the seeker were trying to flush her out. Cali held her breath, willing herself to become invisible, to melt into the shadows. The metal wall was icy against her back, a cruel reminder of how trapped she was. There was no way out, no door, no window, just this oppressive, claustrophobic space. Then suddenly the footsteps stopped again right in front of her. Cali dared to open her eyes just a sliver, and what she saw made her blood run cold. A figure stood there, cloaked in darkness, its features obscured by the dim light. But there was something wrong, something terribly wrong. Its eyes, Cali could see them now, glowed with an unnatural light, a sickly yellow that matched the flickering bulbs above. They were not human eyes. They were cold, devoid of any warmth or compassion. The figure leaned in closer, as if sniffing the air, and Cali stifled a gasp. It was hunting her like an animal hunting its prey. The realization hit her like a blow to the chest, and she felt a surge of panic rising within her. She had to get out of there, had to escape before it was too late. But how? There was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. The figure was so close now that she could feel its cold breath on her face, a breath that smelled of decay and rot. She fought the urge to scream, to lash out, to do anything that would break the silence, but she knew it would be suicide. The figure's hand reached out, a pale, skeletal hand with long, bony fingers. It was searching, groping in the darkness, and Cali knew that if it touched her, it would be the end. She pressed herself harder against the wall, praying that it would pass her by, that she would somehow be spared. And then, as if some unseen force had heard her desperate plea, the figure hesitated. Its hand stopped just inches from her face, and for a moment it seemed to waver, as if unsure of its target. Cali didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe, her eyes wide with terror. The figure straightened up, its glowing eyes scanning the room one last time. Then, with a low, guttural growl, it turned and began to move away, its footsteps echoing in the small, confined space. Cali watched it go, hardly daring to believe her luck. It was leaving, it hadn't found her. But the relief was short-lived. As the figure reached the far side of the room, it stopped again, and this time it let out a sound, a low, sinister chuckle that sent chills down Cali's spine. It knew, somehow it knew she was there. The figure turned, its eyes locking onto hers, and in that moment, Cali knew she was caught. It began to move toward her again, more quickly this time, its hands outstretched, reaching for her. There was no time to think, no time to plan. Instinct took over, and Cali did the only thing she could think of. She ran. Pushing herself off the wall, she bolted toward the far side of the room, her feet slipping on the slick, damp floor. The figure let out a roar of anger, and she could hear it coming after her, its footsteps pounding like a drumbeat in her ear. Cali's heart was racing, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she sprinted across the room. She had no idea where she was going, but she knew she had to get away, had to put as much distance between herself and that thing as possible. She reached the far wall and found a door, half hidden in the shadows. Without thinking, she threw herself against it, the rusty hinges creaking as it swung open. She stumbled through, her momentum carrying her forward, and she nearly fell, but she caught herself just in time. The door slammed shut behind her, and for a brief moment there was silence. Cali leaned against the wall, panting, her heart hammering in her chest. She was safe, at least for now. But the silence was short-lived. She could hear the figure on the other side of the door, its claws scratching against the metal, its growls growing louder. It wouldn't be long before it broke through. Cali pushed herself away from the wall and looked around. She was in another room, slightly larger than the one she had just left, but just as dark and grimy. There was no obvious way out, no windows, just more walls and shadows. But she couldn't stay here. She had to keep moving, had to find a way to escape. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for anything that might help her. And then she saw it, a small, narrow opening in the wall, just big enough for her to squeeze through. It was her only chance. Without hesitation, she ran to the opening and began to crawl through. It was a tight fit, the walls closing in around her, but she forced herself to keep going, inching forward on her elbows and knees. The tunnel was dark, the air thick with dust, but she could see a faint light at the end, a glimmer of hope. Behind her, she could hear the door being wrenched open, the figure's roars echoing through the tunnel. It was coming for her, and it was getting closer. Cali pushed herself harder, her muscles screaming in protest as she crawled faster, the light growing brighter. She was almost there, almost out. And then, finally, she emerged into another room. This one much larger and brighter than the others. She scrambled to her feet, her body trembling with exhaustion, and looked around. It was a control room of some sort, filled with monitors and machines, the walls lined with blinking lights and switches. There was a large window on one side, and through it she could see the outside world, the sky, the trees, the freedom she had been so desperately searching for. But there was no time to take it in. The figure was still coming, and she had to keep moving. She ran to the window, hoping to find a way to open it, to escape, but it was sealed shut, the glass thick and unyielding. Desperation clawed at her as she turned back to the room, her eyes darting around for any other exit. There was none. She was trapped. The door behind her burst open and the figure strode in, its glowing eyes locked onto her. Cali backed away, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. There was nowhere left to run. The figure advanced, its movements slow and deliberate, savoring her fear. Cali's back hit the window and she pressed herself against it, the cold glass sending shivers down her spine. She was out of options. The figure was almost upon her now, its bony fingers reaching out, ready to claim its prize. Cali closed her eyes, bracing herself for the end. And then, just as the figure's hand was about to close around her throat, there was a loud crash, followed by a blinding flash of light. Cali opened her eyes just in time to see the figure stagger back, its form flickering, as if it were being torn apart from the inside. The light grew brighter, engulfing the figure, and with a final, ear-piercing scream, it disintegrated, leaving nothing but a pile of ashes on the floor. Cali stared at the spot where the figure had been, her mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. She was alive. Somehow she had survived. But there was no time to dwell on it. The machines in the room were going haywire, the monitors flashing with warning signs, alarms blaring. The building was unstable, and she needed to get out before it collapsed. She ran to the door, her legs shaky but fueled by adrenaline, and burst out into a long corridor. It was empty, the walls lined with pipes and wires, the floor vibrating beneath her feet. She had no idea where she was, but she knew she had to keep moving. The corridor twisted and turned, leading her deeper into the building, and with each step the alarms grew louder, the vibrations more intense. She was running out of time. Finally, she reached another door, this one marked with a bright red exit sign. Relief flooded through her as she pushed it open and stepped out into the fresh air. She was outside. She had made it. The building behind her was a towering structure of metal and glass, its once imposing form now crumbling as explosions rocked its foundation. Cali stumbled away, her body trembling with exhaustion, and collapsed onto the grass. She lay there for a moment, staring up at the sky, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. She was free. The nightmare was over. But as she lay there, a thought nagged at the back of her mind. What was that place? What had happened to her? And most importantly, who or what had been hunting her? She didn't have the answers, and she wasn't sure she wanted them. All she knew was that she had escaped, that she was alive. And for now, that was enough. But deep down, she knew that this was not the end. Whatever had happened in that building, whatever creature had been after her, it was part of something larger, something far more dangerous. And she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning.